Boardroom Bound, Episode 13. Hello and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give new and aspiring directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder that you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. In today's show, we'll be starting a part of a monthly series with Matt Craven to talk you through the work that you're going to need to do to prepare yourself to be successful for this board transition. Now, Matt is a personal branding and career development expert and founder of the CV and Interview Advisors, as well as LinkedIn Incredible. In short, Matt helps aspiring and existing board members to sell themselves more effectively and secure more director roles. So today is the beginning of a monthly series with Matt. We're going to have him on for at least 3 months, talking about different aspects of what you need to cover and what you need to be successful in. And today we're going to be starting with the CV, the resume. The resume is very different from your resume for a traditional role, even in a C-suite. What you need to do at the board is a different level. So we're going to talk you through everything you need to know from what makes a good board-level resume, the differences between the board-level resume and executives, and what are the common mistakes that directors make when applying for roles. And then we're going to take all of that information and we're going to use an example and we're going to critique one in real life. And perhaps because I'm a glutton for punishment, we're going to critique mine. So I was semi-proud of my board resume, which is different from my regular resume before this show. And Matt gave me a lot of feedback for how to improve it. But we'll walk you through that, and we will post both my before and after versions so you can see what it looks like after Matt's feedback happens. And Matt has a wonderful opportunity where he's going to share in a wonderful complimentary way the skill set that his company does. They're going to offer a 30-minute free opportunity for listeners of this podcast to get their services to experience that feedback for yourself. I'll tell you all about it at the end of the episode. Let's jump into the show. Matt Craven, delighted to have you on the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Yeah, hi, Alexander. Great to be here.
And I'm excited that this will be a regular series that we are talking about doing monthly episodes where we can use some of your expertise as coaching, as learning for our audience to get them up to speed on many of the key areas that they're going to need to have pulled together. Once someone decides they're excited to do this, they've got to think about their resume. They've got to think about their personal branding, their LinkedIn profile, the interviewing techniques, which are so different from the jobs that we're used to at the executive level. So I'm thrilled that we have your expertise that we can leverage for this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts and ideas. We do an awful lot of work with people in this space, so hopefully it will be useful for the people who are dialing in.
Oh, undoubtedly, and especially knowing that we're going to guinea pig mine today and tear the resume apart. This will definitely be a more polished version of mine at the end, and I'm sure I'll be a little embarrassed by how it isn't the quality it should be.
Oh, I'll be gentle with you, Alexander. Don't worry.
Well, I think let's start with the resume for our monthly series, simply because for so many of us, we're used to applying to jobs. We know what that looks like and feels like. We probably had lots of work and background of what it needs to look like and how you build it. But that's not the exact same process for doing it for the board role, right? What makes for a good board level CV?
Well, I think the thing we find is that people who are looking for executive and non-executive roles, very senior people, C-level, board-level people. Mm-hmm. And they've got to a stage where things come naturally. So often they don't need to sell themselves because, they're the head honcho mm-hmm. in many situations. So when they sit down to write their CV or their resume, what tends to happen is they're very understated. And we often see CVs which are bereft of achievements and outcomes. But if you flip that, if you think about a board looking to hire somebody in that kind of a role, they're absolutely looking for somebody who can deliver business benefits, right. Usually tangible, measurable, and significant business benefits. So it's almost a bit of a juxtaposition because you have this need for business benefits to be delivered. And then you've got these people who aren't used to selling themselves. So therefore, when they sit down to write their resume, it tends to be overly task-based and not enough focused on outcomes and achievements. So that's one of the key issues. And I think the other really important thing, which is related to what I've just discussed there, is trying to be a little bit more specific about how you might pitch yourself to the NED market. Too many people like the idea of becoming a NED or a board advisor and imagine it being this part-time gig, a few days a month.
Right.
You get a number of those, you get paid really well, you turn up, you sit around the board table, you drink tea, you eat biscuits, and you chew the fat about strategy.
Add some value, yeah.
And it would be lovely if that was the reality, but the reality is that boards are looking for something specific. There is a skill or some knowledge or some expertise that they need this individual to provide them with. They're not buying 25, 30 years of general experience,
right,
and grey hairs and whiskers. They're buying usually something quite specific. And what we find is a lot of people enter the NED market with a very broad offering. It really just is, I've got 30, 35 years worth of experience, I've got grey hairs and whiskers, and I can, I've been around the block and I can help you with all sorts of things.
Right.
But seldomly does that fly in the NED market. So it's the people who really define what their NED angle is, what their value proposition to that marketplace is, what is their unique selling point, what knowledge, skills and expertise are they offering that a board might want to buy. And that's always our challenge when we're working with clients who are approaching that marketplace, is pinning them down to something quite specific in terms of what it is that they're offering, and getting them to look at themselves as a almost like a service provider, almost like a professional service firm. You're
a specialist. Yeah,
exactly. What is it that you, and we might talk about thought leadership at some stage as well, but you use the term specialist, which is great. When we look at that thought leadership pyramid, at the bottom you've got the generalists. The step up from that is the specialists. The step up from that, you can imagine this going up in a pyramid, so it gets narrower at the top, i.e. there are less people there. Then you've got people who are an authority. Then right at the top, you've got people who are a celebrity. Now, we're not all aspiring to be celebrities, because that's your Richard Bransons of this world.
Right.
But that authority layer is where people should be aspiring to be. And if you can get yourself into that authority layer of the thought leadership pyramid, that's when people are going to sit up and listen. But that comes with knowing what it is that you're offering to the marketplace, rather than being the generalist with a scattergun approach who's just going to market as a experienced business person with a few grey hairs and whiskers, if that makes sense.
I like that model a lot. And I think the easiest way for someone to picture it is like you're applying to a typical job. They don't want to just hire someone who's smart. They want to hire someone who's smart, who is passionate about the topic, ideally has done the topic before, so they can hit the ground running. In the same way for a board, you're not applying to every board. You're applying to the boards who are the specific niche that fits you, whether it's a certain industry or a certain expertise that they need. And I think that's where you're going. That's what your resume has to reflect, so the board can say, yes, this person is a fit, or no, they're not, maybe for the future if we need that. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And this is great, sort of the 30,000-foot view. This is how you should imagine yourself going forward, how you picture it. But I imagine there's also some key differences just in maybe in the language you use or the way you reflect it. So if you're an executive, I would assume you're still a specialist in a certain field, let's say a CFO, like in finance, financial services, those sort of topics. But your story is going to be a little bit different on your board resume than your executive resume, right?
Yes, but very true. And again, I imagine when we work with people to write their resumes for them, we'll start by defining their objectives, and then we'll start talking through what we think their go-to-market pitch is, what their value proposition is, what their key strengths are, what the key achievements they've had in their career look like. And you'll be looking at people who are applying for these board roles, these NED roles, and and they'll start talking about how one of their key skills is, for example, leading projects or managing people, or something that is very much within the realms of what you do within a, CFO, CEO, COO role, your kind of business as usual, strategic, hands-on stuff. But of course, that's not what non-exec directors do. They're there in a more of an advisory capacity. They're not there to manage people. They're not there to deliver projects. And again, I think this sometimes a little bit of a lack of thought about what one's offering is to the marketplace, again, comes back to bite you on the bum. So for us, the most successful people in this marketplace are the ones who put an awful lot of thought into what it is they're going to be offering and what they're going to project to the marketplace, do their resume. Those are the ones that tend to succeed. When we do presentations to audiences of people looking for these board advisory and NED roles, we often do a poll. How many of you actually have a non-exec director or board advisory position, and how many of you are what we would call aspiring
right
non-exec directors? And usually it's about 80% skewed towards aspiring rather than actually having some roles. So it is difficult securing those types of roles, but I think it's difficult for the reasons that we've just been talking about. There are roles out there and people are looking for this kind of resource, but a lot of people take too broad brush approach to how they sell themselves through their resume, their LinkedIn profile, and their general market presence. So I think that's a really crucial piece of advice to give.
Well, I think that makes absolute sense. And we're summarizing up sort of some of the best practices, which makes great sense. But we've touched a little bit around this, almost the common mistakes that you're going to see when people are applying for board roles. Maybe we can take a little bit more deeper dive into that as well before we get into bringing this all together into fixing what I'm sure is, as we have this conversation, not a good example of my CV.
Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps if I go into a few more specifics around this, the resume. So one of the things is quite interesting, and I don't think there's an obvious answer to this, but there are two distinct types of resume or CV, as we call it over here in the UK. There is the traditional chronological, probably 3-page document, which has quite a lot of detail about one's career. And then there's what we call the executive biography, or exec bio for short, which is that 1-page wonder, which certainly has its place. Now, the difficulty is you never quite know which one to send, because some people will want the detailed CV and some people might like the sort of 1-page overview. So our recommendation is to have both.
Okay.
And if you can do a little bit of digging at the start of the recruitment process, hopefully get a feel for what it is that they are going to prefer to receive. But I would guess that in most recruitment processes, regardless of what role it's for, somebody somewhere is going to want to see the detailed CV. You get conflicting opinions on that. Personally, I don't see why you would want to do less due diligence on somebody looking for a NED or board advisory role than you would for somebody looking for a full-time permanent role. Why would you want to do less due diligence on that individual? So why would you want less information to work from? And if you think also statistically, 85% of people that make any kind of hiring decision will then go and look at the person's LinkedIn profile.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I was assuming, and based on what I've been schooled, is you do the resume as a 1-page version, because that's basically to get someone interested enough to then go find the detail on your LinkedIn profile. Yeah.
And it does work that way in certain situations. And it's very difficult to kind of know what behavior the person making the decision is going to display. But we would recommend that you have your one-page wonder, your exec bio type document. You also have a more detailed, 2 or 3. I think 2 pages is in the US tends to be more the accepted norm, and 3 pages in the UK is probably the more accepted norm for senior people. So you have your sort of briefer document, your more detailed document, and then LinkedIn kind of is a slightly different channel of communication, takes on a slightly different style. And people are looking at your LinkedIn profile for more of your professional footprint and your personal brand than sort of the specifics necessarily of your career that your exec bio or your resume might show.
And which is why it's such a logical thing that in our second series next month, we'll be doing the deep dive into LinkedIn and your personal branding after we sort of did let's call it like the door opener on your resume today.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that all makes great sense. And before this call, I'd felt pretty good. I had developed what I thought was a solid one-page version. And for the listeners, we will be posting both the pre-version before Matt gives me the feedback on the one-pager that I had done, and the after version when I make the dramatic improvements after he gives me all the advice. So I have this one-page summary version that I thought was pitching myself as my expertise in financial services and fintech. And I thought it brought it all really well together. But listening to you now, I realize there's work to do, so I'm excited to get some of your feedback on it.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing we should say, there are some slight differences between a resume for the US market and a CV for the UK market. I don't think there are huge differences, but there certainly are if you look at the kind of middle of the road documents that we see. Our methodology that we've developed is a little bit more based on 3 things. It's based on global recruitment best practice, but also some innovations around marketing. So we very much use marketing techniques in the documents that we produce, and also the psychology of how people read documents, as well as having an understanding of some of the more modern day recruitment practices. And what I mean by that is looking at the algorithms that sit within the applicant tracking systems and recruitment software, because you've got to get past the machine to get to the human.
Right.
So there's some things around that to consider. But if we look at your CV, what I like straight up is that you've not filled the first half page full of superfluous information. We see an awful lot of documents where people have got all their contact details, all their personal details, their home address, and how many pets they've got, and all sorts of weird and wacky things. You've just gone straight into some key information about what you are. So I think that's absolutely spot on. Board of directors member for early stage and middle market companies. I think that's a pretty good starting point.
And just to put a flag there. So I was thinking what I need to do is show the grounding of where I am today, not the aspirational. I consider the, let's use a soccer analogy in the UK, the Premier League, right? You don't jump to being on a Premier League board, right? You've got to start and move your way up through the championship level and gradually get up there. So where I am today versus where I want to be. Is that a good way to be positioning that?
Yeah, well, like all good marketing, you start by thinking about who's your target audience and what are their needs. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, Alexander, that you've thought about your target audience and you've positioned yourself for that market. So that makes absolute perfect sense. So we then move into the actual text. So then first 4 lines at the top of your CV, in that section that I would call the profile or the summary. Everything you've written there is really solid. I think it talks a little bit more about you than the organizations that you will be targeting.
Okay.
So it's sort of, hey, this is me. What I would recommend thinking about is, what is it that your target audience wants and needs? And can you talk directly to them about what you would go into their organization and help them with and do for them, and what what would you drive forwards in their business, and what benefits would that have?
Got it.
So it's just flipping the psychology a little bit from this is all about you to make it all about them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I was taught very early on about marketing copy. And I mean, I fall foul of it all the time when I write marketing copy. It's very easy to say, hey, you should use our executive CV or resume writing service because we're good at this, we're good at that, we can do this, we can do that. But actually, the person on the receiving end, they don't care. They don't care about us. They just care about themselves.
Good point.
They want a job. They want financial security. They want career progression. Whatever it is they want, that's what we've got to home in on. And that's, I think, how I would recommend just tweaking your messaging at the top of your CV.
Very good.
Am I being gentle enough here?
No, that's fantastic. That's exactly what we need. Yes. And I think for all of our audience, that's easy to understand, right? It does nothing to do with us. It's the person on the other side, whether it's a headhunter or the head of a nominating committee and governance committee, that's who you're writing to.
Yeah, absolutely. and let me say, everything that's in here is really solid. There's nothing in here that I think is wrong or badly written or irrelevant. It's all good. It's more about just making some subtle tweaks. And there are some innovations that I'm going to talk about shortly that I think will really help. So the next thing that I really like on your CV is this section called expertise. And you've got 1, 3, 4, 5, you've got 15 bullet points talking about things like product development, risk management, regulatory compliance, startup and expansion leadership, mergers and acquisitions. That's great. That's making the document very keyword rich, and that's one of the ways to optimize it for the applicant tracking systems and the recruitment software. It also provides a nice kind of cross-reference for a recruiter or a headhunter who's looking at a job description and then looking at your skills. So I think that's a great section to have, and definitely recommend having that. A couple of other things you can do for optimization. And it's interesting because board advisory and NED roles, they more so than other types of roles, they might be secured through your personal network and recommendation and things like that. But certainly that market is quite burgeoning, certainly in the UK, with recruitment agencies and certain online portals kind of getting in on the mix and wanting to make some revenues from this marketplace. So the recruitment processes are starting more and more to mirror the recruitment processes you see across the board. And that does mean that some of the roles are recruited through recruitment agencies, and they go through all these formal recruitment processes with the recruitment software and things like that. So I think that's important. If we look at the applicant tracking systems, there are certain things they're looking out for. They're programmed to recognize certain headings on a resume or a CV. So each section that you create, make sure it has a heading and make sure that heading is an obvious one. Sometimes people do use rather cryptic headings, and that's not always helpful. So make sure that the headings are logical. They're also often looking for what you're an expert in. And some of these algorithms are very badly programmed, and it will find some random piece of information on your document and say, Alexander is an expert in, and then it'll just pick something utterly random. And you'll be like, well, why on earth did it pick that? But that's the way the algorithm is working. So what you can do is signpost the algorithm. One of our strategies is to say, certainly in the resumes and CVs that we write, is to say at the start, so-and-so is a whatever, and then we'll put directly after that, expert in, and then we'll describe what it is that they're an expert in. Now, if you remember at the start of the session, we were talking about defining what your NED angle is. Well, that's what we're talking about there. What are you an expert in? What is your offering, your value proposition, your angle? And if you dictate what that is on your document, hopefully that's what the algorithm finds and comes up with a relevant result for the recruiter.
So for a good example would probably be if someone was in financial services, probably a past CFO, looking at fintech, sort of the spaces that I'm playing in. If you were to say in the beginning that you say you're an SEC financial expert, which is a key term in the US, that's the kind of thing that would jump out, and the robots would be able to pick that up pretty easily, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then what is the value in what you're doing? So, I mean, let me give an example. Because I've been involved in some board advisory work myself, but if I was helping an organization, chances are that I would help probably an SME. But what I'm really good at is building things from nothing, evangelizing business opportunities, seeing opportunities to develop new products and services in new markets, and building strategy and infrastructure to capitalize on those opportunities. Mm-hmm. And my resume, my CV, that's what my value proposition statement would be. So this is kind of line 1 and 2 effectively. I've often, if I was looking for a permanent full-time job, I've often used this as an example when I've been coaching. I probably would apply for a job as a commercial director within an SME, mm-hmm. and it would be all about developing new revenue streams in new markets, and developing the strategy, commercial strategy, and operational infrastructure to rapidly drive profitability in those markets. And then when you put that together, it starts to feel like that's a proposition, that's something real, that's something tangible. You can almost feel and taste what it would be that I would come into your organization and do. So if you're an organization that is looking to diversify or expand, you can see the relevance in that.
Sure. Again, pitching it to your audience and solving their needs.
Exactly. Now, the other thing, I actually, going back to one of my previous points, I think there are tucked away within your document some outcomes. The £75 million savings and 5% expense reduction that you did when you were at the consulting company. But I think if we look at your outcomes as a percentage of the rest of the CV, I think it's actually quite skinny. Mm-hmm. I think you've talked very little about the outcomes and achievements. And I might challenge you, and I know that you are absolutely awesome at what you do. But if all I had to go on was your CV, your resume, I might say to you, Alexander, how can I tell that you're good at what you do by reading your CV?
Right. So facts and figures are very different than platitudes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And a fantastic way to really ramp that up is to use case studies. If you have a look at my LinkedIn profile, I wrote an article, and it was about Aesop's fables. If you remember, Aesop is the chap who wrote a number of short stories. Mm-hmm. The Boy Who Cried Wolf, right. It in particular stands out to me. But what it's all about is delivering a message, and delivering messages through stories, because stories give the message context, and them layers of context enable you to conceptualize and almost visualize what it is that's being communicated to you. So you could take an achievement, case in point, the £75 million savings and the 5% expense reduction. Now, on its own, it sounds like it should be brilliant. It sounds great, but, where did you do it? Who did you do it for? How did you do it? All that context is missing a little bit. So right. If we took that and we wrote that as a little mini case study, and I'm talking like a little 6-line paragraph, nothing too long-winded, and this little mini case study is written in a very specific way. We actually use a little formula called STAR. So we start by describing we give the name of the company if it's not highly confidential. the name of the company, and what was their problem or situation. And we describe your involvement. What was your task? And then we describe your actions, which walks the reader through the things you did to drive them savings. And then the result would be, succeeded in delivering a major, whatever it was, cost rationalization program that saved the company £75 million and a 5% expense reduction. And that little mini case study is such a powerful way of writing an achievement. But what we suggest people do is have all your achievements as part of the work experience section, of course, but then pick the best three, write them as case studies, and pop them on page 1. And that way you can take a huge achievement from maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago that might otherwise not get noticed on the CV, and you can give it power, write it as a case study and put it on page 1. So you have 3 of these little mini case studies on page 1. In fact, what a lot of our clients do is they will buy from us a whole heap of case studies, maybe 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of them that they tuck away somewhere on their computer files. And then each time they apply for a role, they'll just pick the 3 that are the most relevant to that particular opportunity.
Pick the appropriate ones,
and plonk them on page 1. And all of a sudden, they've just positioned themselves as the ideal person for that particular company's challenges, rather than just having this sort of generic same old CV that they send out every time. So it's an incredibly powerful and easy way to tailor your CV for specific roles.
Someone who's a headhunter described it to me before of you should build a resume that is pages, 5, 10 pages in a sort of Chinese menu format. Anything you have ever done, it's all in there in the detail. And then when you're applying for a specific opportunity, you will pick out 1 from here, 2 from here, 1 from here, 3 from there, put them together, and that's the version you send because it's the appropriate specific one for them.
I think it's wise advice. And actually we have something we call the career autobiography, which is imagine if you were asked to write an autobiography, what would you do? You would go away and you would write down all the key events that have happened in your life, sufficient to fill 300 pages. You would send that to your ghostwriter, who would write all these key events that have happened in your life into this book. And there you go. There's your autobiography. So we have something called the career autobiography, which is kind of like a professional version of that. If you were to document all the key events that have happened in your professional life, all the achievements, projects, successes, failures, all those little interesting scenarios that crop up, the situation that there was some conflict, the difficult stakeholder, that, whatever it might be, if you had a log of all those events that have happened in your career, and actually you wrote them all as little star case studies, I would then recommend sticking it in a spreadsheet and having the tabs as the skills that you might need to have for each particular role. And each time you click that tab, up pops a couple of case studies that prove you have that skill. Then you've got this big chart, this log of all the key events that have happened in your professional life. And then all of a sudden, you become extremely knowledgeable and aware of yourself as a professional. If you think about going to an interview, it's essentially a sales call for, at this level, for what might be a £500,000 3-year contract, if you look at it in that way. If it's a permanent role, for example, there's a lot of money on offer. That's a huge investment by the organization. But if it's a board advisory or net role, it's still significant sums of money. So you're pitching for that contract. So the interview is essentially going along to a sales call. If you're going to sell anything to anybody, you need very good product or service knowledge. You can't sell something that you don't know about. And that's a lot of people's issue. And we'll probably talk more about the interview technique in another session. But being self-aware and knowledgeable about yourself is the only way that you'll perform well in interviews. So this career autobiography really helps with that. But I think we're hitting on a common theme here, aren't we? All the way through this session, we keep coming back to this point about self-awareness and being able to clearly define your angle, your value proposition, what it is you've got to offer. And without that, I don't feel like anybody has a starting point, really.
Well, I think, Matt, you've covered so much, and the way I want to summarize it up for people is that it's a lot of work, clearly, but a lot of work needs to go into that to make yourself stand out, to be able to showcase that you are the right person at the right time for the role. And if that's what you want to do in a crowded marketplace that more and more people are becoming interested in, that's what you're going to need to do. And I think you've given us so much information that we can take forward today. Clearly for myself, thinking I was not bad. So this will be much better as a result. So we will share the updated version as well as the original version so people can see how that has grown and changed. And we've already started talking about what we're going to talk about next month in terms of the personal branding, the LinkedIn, and the thought leadership. I love the pyramid they started talking about today. So I'm excited to have you back on the show very soon. And Matt, I'd love to just make sure that our audience knows how they can reach out and be in touch with you, because I'm sure many will want to follow up. There are the expert services that you offer that I'm sure people might be interested in. Would you be able to tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you for that. What we've decided would be a really cool thing to do for the listeners is to offer everybody the opportunity to take advantage of a free critique of their resume or CV, if you're this side of the pond. And one of my team will review your document and provide a detailed critique, which can be done via email, but we're quite happy to pick up the phone or jump onto a Skype or a Zoom session and really do what we've done with Alexander's CV today with your document and provide you with some really valuable and useful feedback on what you can do to improve it. And then, of course, we do offer these sorts of services, and I don't want to talk about that too much, but we have created some discounted fees for your listeners, and we've got a page set up on our website that talks about what those services are and how much they cost, and we've discounted it quite a lot. And what I'll do is I'll share those links with Alexander so that your listeners can take advantage of those two things by accessing the relevant pages on our website at this end.
Which is wonderful, and we're grateful to always have wonderful, unique opportunities for the Boardroom Bound community, and we will make sure we put those in the show notes so that people can follow up with you directly. I'm sure there'll be lots of interest. And, Matt, we were delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and helping all of us be more Boardroom Bound.
Yeah, you're welcome, Alexander, and good luck to everybody, and I'll speak to you all again soon.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Matt Craven, and I am so grateful for his expertise on how we all need to think about our board resume, which is very different from your traditional resume for a regular job, even for the C-suite. And I love that Matt talked us through, using my own as an example, tearing it apart very gently and very kindly, how to think through what's going to be successful, what's going to stand out, practical guidance that we're all going to need as we apply for board roles. And maybe the best part is that Matt is opening up his service, a paid service, a professional service, for a free CV resume critique for every one of my listeners. We'll have links in the show notes where you can go and spend time with his expertise of his staff, getting that same feedback just in the same way I did. Invaluable. This is exactly the sort of information and guidance we love to give to our listeners. So remember to head over to podcast.gordon.edu where you can get the links to all of today's resources, including that free resume critique. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, my request would be that you please take 30 seconds to leave a review on iTunes. These reviews are the best way that we get out word about this show. Now, thanks for joining me on this episode, and I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.